I received the call on a Tuesday evening while making dinner in my kitchen. My parents had a family opportunity they wanted to discuss. Their voices were cheerful as they explained their plan. I should sign over my house to my unemployed sister Amy while moving back home, where they'd generously discount my rent. They framed it as helping family, but all I saw was the pattern continuing. Me sacrificing everything while Amy gets handed the world for free. I always knew my family operated on different standards for me and my sister. Growing up in suburban Pittsburgh, our modest two-story home became the training ground for what I now recognize as a deeply unbalanced family dynamic. From my earliest memories, I was the one expected to excel, to be responsible, to set an example. Amy, just 2 years younger, somehow existed under a completely different set of rules. By 14, I was working weekends at the local grocery store, bagging items and collecting carts in the parking lot, regardless of Pennsylvania's unpredictable weather. My parents nodded approvingly when I handed over my first paycheck, explaining that I should open a savings account. "This is how you build character, Dominic," my father would say, his tone suggesting this was the highest praise he could offer. Meanwhile, Amy spent her weekends at the mall with friends or lounging in her room, her responsibilities limited to occasionally loading the dishwasher when directly asked. When I questioned this disparity, my mother would smooth my hair and say, "Your sister is different. She's more sensitive." The implication was clear. I was strong enough to handle responsibility. Amy needed protection. High school brought more of the same. I maintained honor roll grades while working 20 hours weekly at various jobs. First the grocery store, then the movie theater. Finally landing a position at the hardware store that paid slightly above minimum wage. Every cent went toward my future college funds. A used car I paid for entirely myself, and the growing list of expenses my parents deemed my responsibility. Amy failed classes regularly, dropped out of every extracurricular activity she started, and still received a brand new car for her 16th birthday. When I expressed frustration at the obvious double standard, my father's response was always some variation of, "Different children need different approaches, son." College applications arrived, and I secured admission to Penn State with a partial scholarship. My parents congratulated me, but made it clear that the remaining tuition was my responsibility. "You'll value your education more if you pay for it," my mother explained while helping Amy pick out decoration themes for her bedroom, the same bedroom they assured her would remain hers for as long as she needed. I spent my freshman and sophomore years of college commuting from home to save money, working nearly full-time hours while maintaining a full course load. The exhaustion was constant, but so was my determination to graduate and build my own life. Then came my 21st birthday. I expected perhaps a small celebration, maybe even acknowledgement of my hard work balancing school and employment. Instead, my parents presented me with a neatly typed rental agreement. "We think it's time you contributed to household expenses," my father said, sliding the paper across our kitchen table. $500 monthly, plus utilities. "This will teach you financial responsibility." I stared at the document in disbelief. I'm already paying for my car, insurance, phone, tuition, and all my personal expenses. I barely have enough left after saving for future rent deposits. My mother's smile was sympathetic but unmoved. "That's adulthood, honey. Bills don't pay themselves." That evening, as I sat in my bedroom calculating how many additional hours I'd need to work to cover this new expense, I heard my parents in the living room with Amy, who had just returned from dropping out of her third attempt at community college classes. They were laughing, discussing plans for her upcoming trip to Florida with friends, a trip they were funding as a mental health break for her. The next morning, I confronted them directly. "Why am I being charged rent while Amy lives here completely free? She's 19, not working, not in school. I'm working and maintaining a 3.8 GPA. My father's face hardened. "Your sister is finding herself. You've always been different, more capable. This isn't punishment, Dominic. It's because we believe in you." That was the moment I recognized the truth that would shape my next decade. In my family, success was penalized and failure was rewarded. Something broke inside me that day. Not my determination, but any illusion that the rules in our household would ever be applied fairly. I signed the rental agreement and picked up weekend shifts at a local restaurant. The resentment grew alongside my bank account as I watched Amy cycle through brief periods of employment, quitting whenever the job became too stressful or not fulfilling enough. My parents covered her car payments when she couldn't, paid off her credit cards when she overspent, and never once suggested she contribute financially to the household. It became clear that teaching responsibility only applied to me. For Amy, the world would always provide a safety net in the form of our parents. For me, that same world contained nothing but hard lessons, and the expectation that I would succeed despite them, or perhaps because of them. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Pittsburgh. The salary wasn't impressive, but it offered stability and growth potential. Most importantly, it was mine earned through years of balancing academics and work. My parents' response was a predictable mix of pride and expectation. "Now you can start paying us the full market rate for rent," my father announced over the dinner where we were supposedly celebrating my employment. $750 monthly seems fair. I nodded mechanically, too exhausted to argue anymore. The math was simple and disheartening. Even with my new salary, paying this amount of rent would delay my plans to move out by at least another year. My schedule became a relentless cycle of work. Weekdays at the marketing firm, weekends picking up freelance graphic design projects. Sleep became a luxury, socializing nearly non-existent. But the numbers in my savings account climbed steadily, each digit representing another step toward freedom. Amy, now 23, had finally completed an associate's degree in general studies and found part-time work at a boutique downtown. Her schedule allowed ample time for self-care and social activities. Her contribution to the household remained $0. When I asked my mother about this continuing disparity, her explanation shifted slightly. "Amy's job doesn't pay much, Dominic. We can't expect her to give us money she doesn't have." "Neither did my jobs during college," I countered. "But you still expected rent from me. That was different. You've always been more resourceful." The conversation ended there, as it always did, with vague compliments that somehow justified the uneven treatment. By 23, I had saved enough for a security deposit and 3 months' rent on my own place. The apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom unit in an aging building with questionable plumbing and neighbors who seemed allergic to quiet hours. But the day I signed that lease felt like breaking the surface after years underwater. I announced my move at Sunday dinner, 2 weeks before my planned departure. My father nodded approvingly. My mother feigned both pride and distress at her firstborn leaving the nest, and Amy rolled her eyes, commenting that the neighborhood I could afford was kind of sketchy. The next weekend, my parents hosted a dinner party for several family friends. As glasses of wine were poured and conversation flowed, I overheard my father introducing me to his golf buddy. "This is Dominic, our responsible one. Already independent with his own place at 23. Works like a machine, this kid." The pride in his voice was genuine, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of warmth. Then he continued as they moved toward Amy. "And our youngest, Amy. Such a creative spirit. Still living at home while she figures out her path. Some people bloom at different rates, you know." The double standard had never been articulated so clearly. My independence wasn't just expected, it was the minimum acceptable outcome. Amy's continued dependence wasn't a failure, but a charming personality trait, worthy of protection and endless patience. That night catalyzed something in me. If different standards would always apply, then I would use that knowledge strategically. I would build a life so independently successful that they could never claim credit for it, and so secure that I would never need to ask them for anything. The next 3 years passed in a blur of focused determination. I earned 2 promotions at work, supplemented my income with freelance projects, and lived well below my means. Every financial decision was calculated. No vacations, minimal dining out, a 5-year-old phone that worked perfectly fine despite its outdated features. Meanwhile, Amy cycled through 4 different jobs and 2 attempts at bachelor's degree programs. She acquired and abandoned expensive hobbies with startling frequency: pottery, photography, jewelry making, each requiring equipment my parents readily funded. Her car was replaced with a newer model when the original one didn't feel right anymore. Her wardrobe expanded regularly. Her social calendar remained full. And her bank account, from what I could gather, remained perpetually near empty. I found genuine connections outside my family. Taylor, a colleague who became my closest friend, was the first person to name what was happening. Dominic, what you're describing is classic family scapegoat and golden child dynamics, he said during one of our regular Thursday night beers. You're expected to carry all the responsibility while your sister gets all the support. They're not bad people. I found myself defending them instinctively. They just have different expectations. Different expectations based on what? Not age, clearly. Not ability. Since you've proven yourself capable of everything they've thrown at you. So what's left? I had no answer. But the question lingered, undermining the justifications I'd accepted for years. By 27, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest house in a developing neighborhood just outside downtown Pittsburgh. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small yard, and most importantly, mine. The day I received the keys felt surreal. No one had handed me anything. Every square foot represented countless hours of work, sacrifice, and single-minded focus. I invited my family to see the house after I'd moved in. My mother brought a houseplant and some homemade cookies. My father walked through each room with a critical eye, pointing out minor flaws in the construction and areas that would need work. Amy wandered around with obvious disinterest, until she found the spare bedroom I'd set up as a home office. This would make a cute nursery someday, she commented, already redecorating my space in her mind. It's perfect for my freelance work, I replied firmly. That evening, as they prepared to leave, my father clasped my shoulder. You know, I think charging you rent early on was the right call. Look at you now, homeowner before 30. Amy could learn from your example. The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe through it. They had created precisely the conditions they were now admiring the results of, while simultaneously ensuring Amy would never develop the same skills. And somehow, they saw no contradiction. My house became my sanctuary, the physical embodiment of boundaries I was finally learning to establish. Family dinners became monthly rather than weekly events. Holidays were negotiable. When my parents called with quick favors that inevitably expanded into time-consuming projects, I learned to say, "Sorry, I'm not available." The distance created space for me to recognize patterns I'd been too close to see clearly before. As I approached 30, my career continued its steady upward trajectory. I was now a senior marketing strategist, respected by colleagues and valued by clients. My house had appreciated in value thanks to thoughtful improvements and the neighborhood's rising popularity. My emergency fund could cover 6 months of expenses, and my retirement accounts were growing steadily. I had built the security I'd always craved. What I didn't realize was that in my family system, my stability would soon be viewed not as my achievement but as a resource to be redistributed. My 30th birthday arrived with little fanfare, exactly as I preferred it. A small gathering of close friends at my favorite brewery, good conversation, and no dramatic speeches or expectations. Taylor presented me with a custom-framed map of Pittsburgh, with a small star marking my house. "To commemorate your kingdom," he joked, but the sentiment touched me deeply. I had built something meaningful, a life that was authentically mine. The contrast with Amy's 30th birthday 3 months later couldn't have been more stark. My parents rented an event space, hired caterers, and invited extended family and numerous friends. The celebration was extravagant by our family's middle-class standards. An open bar, professional photography, and custom decorations featuring photos of Amy throughout the years. During his toast, my father raised his glass with tears in his eyes. "Our baby girl, 30 years old. Amy, your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. Your kindness, your creativity, your spirit, you bring so much joy to everyone around you." I applauded along with everyone else, fighting the familiar twinge of resentment. No similar speech had accompanied my milestone birthday. The real surprise came later that evening, when my father clinked his glass again for everyone's attention. "We have one more announcement," he said, looking at Amy with unmistakable pride. After much discussion, Amy has agreed to start contributing to household expenses. Our little girl is officially adulting. The crowd cheered as Amy gave an exaggerated bow. Later, I learned that this contribution amounted to $200 monthly, roughly one-fourth of what I had been charged at her age, despite inflation and significantly increased housing costs in the intervening years. That night marked a shift in our family dynamics, though not the one my parents had publicly proclaimed. Amy's token financial responsibility came with an unexpected side effect. She suddenly viewed herself as financially stressed and began looking toward me, the successful sibling, as a potential resource. The first request came just weeks after her birthday celebration. My phone rang as I was preparing for an important client presentation. "Dominic, thank God you answered." Amy's voice carried the breathless urgency I'd come to recognize as the prelude to asking for something. "My car is making this terrible noise, and the mechanic says it needs some major repair that costs like $1,200. I was wondering if you could help me out, just until next month, when I get paid." "That's a lot of money, Amy. Don't Mom and Dad usually help with your car issues?" Her tone shifted immediately to defensive. "They're already letting me live at home for practically nothing. I can't ask them for more. You own your house and have that big job. This is what siblings do, they help each other." The irony wasn't lost on me after years of unequal treatment. Suddenly we were supposed to be equals when she needed something. Still, I offered to look at her car myself first, having learned basic maintenance out of financial necessity years earlier. The terrible noise turned out to be nothing more than loose heat shields, a $50 fix at most. When I explained this to Amy, her relief was tempered with obvious disappointment that no cash would be changing hands. This incident might have remained isolated, but it instead established a pattern. Over the next several months, Amy approached me with various emergencies requiring financial assistance: unexpected dental work, a friend's destination wedding she couldn't afford to attend, an opportunity to invest in a guaranteed successful multi-level marketing scheme. I declined each request, suggesting alternatives or offering non-monetary help. Each refusal was met with increasing resentment, often followed by comments like, "Must be nice to have so much you can't even help your only sister." Meanwhile, my parents began making their own unusual requests. My mother called one Sunday afternoon, her voice carrying that special tone of concern she reserved for family matters. "Dominic, your father and I have had some unexpected expenses come up. We were wondering if you might be able to loan us $1,500, just until next month." The request was unprecedented. My parents had always been financially stable, if not particularly wealthy. They owned their home outright, had reasonable retirement savings, and maintained minimal debt. "What kind of unexpected expenses?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Just bills, honey. You know how everything adds up sometimes." I pressed for details, and eventually learned the truth. They had paid off Amy's maxed-out credit card after she'd become overwhelmed by the minimum payments. They'd also covered the security deposit and first month's rent when her friend Jenna needed a new apartment, and Amy had offered our parents help without consulting them first. This revelation cemented my growing suspicion. The financial dynamic in our family wasn't changing. It was simply expanding to include me as a contributor rather than just Amy as a beneficiary. I declined the loan request as gently as possible. "I'm sorry, but I've allocated my budget pretty tightly this month. I'm sure you understand you taught me to be financially responsible after all." My mother's disappointment was palpable even through the phone. "Well, I suppose we'll figure something out. We always do." The guilt trip was familiar territory, but for the first time, I recognized it clearly for what it was: manipulation, not parental wisdom. Similar requests continued over the following months, always framed as temporary loans or family emergencies. I established a simple boundary. I would not provide financial assistance without clear information about what the money was for, and I would not fund anything related to Amy's voluntary expenses. This boundary was met with increasing emotional pressure. Conversations with my parents now regularly included updates about Amy's various struggles: her trouble finding fulfilling work, her difficulties maintaining friendships, her anxiety about finances. The subtext was always the same: you have resources, she has needs, and family should help family. The situation came to a head at Thanksgiving dinner that year. Amy announced she had quit her job at the boutique after a disagreement with the manager about scheduling. He wanted me to work Black Friday at 5 in the morning, she explained, stabbing at her turkey with unnecessary force. As if anyone should have to work those kinds of hours. I bit my tongue, remembering countless early mornings and late nights I'd worked without complaint. Well, honey, you can take your time finding something that's a better fit, my mother assured her. There's no rush. My father nodded in agreement before turning to me. Speaking of jobs, Dominic, that marketing firm of yours must be doing well. Your mother mentioned you weren't able to help us out last month, but perhaps things have improved since then? The conversation had been steered with the subtlety of a bulldozer. Before I could respond, Amy jumped in. Yeah, living in that big house all by yourself while I'm stuck in my childhood bedroom. Must be nice. Something snapped inside me. Years of accumulated frustration surged to the surface. Actually, it is nice. Nice to have worked for everything I have. Nice to have paid my own way since I was 14. Nice to have been charged rent at 21, while you're just now making token payments at 30. The table fell silent. My mother's eyes widened in shock. My father's narrowed in disapproval, and Amy's welled with immediate tears. I can't believe you're throwing that in my face, she whispered. It's not my fault Mom and Dad recognized I needed more support than you did. Support is one thing. A free ride for 3 decades is something else entirely. My father's voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Dominic. We've always treated you both fairly based on your individual needs and capabilities. I laughed a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. Fair? You charged me rent during college while funding Amy's repeated failures. You expected me to work while allowing her endless finding herself phases. And now you're hitting me up for loans to cover her expenses while telling her there's no rush to find another job. Please explain how any of that is fair. My mother reached for my hand across the table. I pulled away before she could touch me. We're your family, Dominic, she said softly. Families help each other. Funny how that help only seems to flow in Amy's direction. I stood up, no longer hungry despite the feast spread before us. I think I need some air. As I stepped onto the porch where I'd spent countless afternoons of my childhood, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I had named the dynamic out loud, not just to myself or to friends, but to my family directly. The pattern had been exposed, and with that exposure came a strange sense of both liberation and dread. This confrontation felt like only the beginning of something bigger and potentially more destructive than I was prepared for. I didn't know then how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. December arrived with its usual flurry of holiday obligations and end-of-year work deadlines. After the Thanksgiving confrontation, a tense silence settled between me and my family. My mother called once with a transparent attempt at normalcy, asking about my Christmas plans as if our last interaction had never happened. My father sent a text about the weather. Amy remained completely silent, unusual for her, as conflict typically prompted increased contact rather than withdrawal. The fragile peace shattered 2 weeks before Christmas. My parents called for a family dinner with an urgency that suggested announcement rather than request. When I arrived at their house, the dining room table was set with more care than usual. The good dishes, cloth napkins, candles. Amy was already seated, her expression a mix of smugness and apprehension. My mother served her specialty lasagna, while my father poured wine. The deliberate normalcy felt ominous, like the artificial calm before a storm. We made stilted small talk about holiday traffic and the unseasonably warm weather until halfway through the meal, when my father finally cleared his throat. We wanted to have this conversation in person, he began, setting down his fork. Amy has had some unfortunate news. Amy dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, though I noticed no actual tears. I got fired, she announced. For absolutely no reason. Surely there was some reason given, I said carefully. The manager said I had attendance issues, which is completely unfair. I was only late a few times, and I always called ahead when I couldn't make a shift. My father shook his head sympathetically. The job market today is brutal. Unreasonable expectations. No loyalty to employees. I resisted pointing out that showing up on time and completing scheduled shifts were hardly unreasonable expectations. The timing couldn't be worse, my mother added. Right before the holidays, and with Amy finally contributing to household expenses. I sensed the conversation's direction before they reached their point. Amy's job loss would inevitably become someone else's responsibility. Specifically, mine. My father confirmed my suspicion moments later. We were thinking, since you have that spare bedroom in your house, maybe Amy could stay with you for a week or two? Just until she gets back on her feet with a new position. I'd be super quiet, Amy added quickly. You wouldn't even know I was there. And it would give me a change of scenery, which my therapist says might be good for my anxiety. The request seemed reasonable on the surface, a short-term arrangement to help a family member in need, but years of pattern recognition warned me otherwise. Nothing with Amy was ever truly temporary, and a week or two would inevitably stretch into months or longer. I work from home 3 days a week, I said. My spare bedroom is my office. It wouldn't really work with my schedule. You could work at the kitchen table those days, my mother suggested, as if rearranging my professional life was a minor consideration. Family has to come first, Dominic. There it was again, the implication that being family meant I should sacrifice while Amy received. The familiar pressure built in my chest, but this time, I recognized it for what it was. The weight of expectations I hadn't agreed to carry. I'm sorry about your job situation, Amy. I'm happy to help you update your resume or practice interview skills. But staying at my house won't work. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's expression hardened, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and Amy's face crumpled into practiced distress. After everything your mother and I have done for you, my father began, his voice low with disappointment. I appreciate everything you've done, I interrupted, surprising myself with my calm tone. But my house isn't available as a solution to this problem. The discussion deteriorated from there, with increasing emotional appeals and thinly veiled accusations of selfishness. I held firm to my boundary, but by the time I left that evening, the message was clear. My refusal had confirmed their view of me as the family villain. 2 days later, I received a text from Amy. Mom and Dad said I should try talking to you directly again. Can I please stay just for 2 weeks? I promise I'll be out by New Year's. I really need this, Dominic. Against my better judgment, and against the explicit advice of my therapist, whom I'd recently started seeing to navigate these family dynamics, I agreed to a strictly limited arrangement. 2 weeks maximum, with a written agreement about house rules and a firm departure date of December 31st. Amy moved in the next day with significantly more belongings than a 2-week stay should require. 4 suitcases, multiple boxes of essentials, and her collection of houseplants suggested intentions far beyond our agreement. Still, I showed her to the spare room, reviewed the house rules. No guests without permission, quiet hours after 10, shared spaces kept clean, and tried to maintain optimism about this temporary arrangement. The first 3 days passed without major incident. Amy slept late, spent hours on her phone, and made token efforts at job searching. She left dishes in the sink and lights on throughout the house, but these seemed like minor annoyances in the grand scheme of things. By the end of the first week, the situation had deteriorated significantly. Amy invited friends over without asking, treating my home as her personal social space. She borrowed my groceries without replacing them, used my expensive skincare products, and consistently violated the quiet hours we'd agreed upon. When confronted, her response was always some variation of, "Don't be so uptight, it's not a big deal." 2 weeks became 3, then 4. The promised departure date of New Year's Eve came and went, without any indication Amy was preparing to leave. When I raised the issue, she burst into tears, claiming she'd applied for literally hundreds of jobs without success. Her savings were depleted, and she had nowhere else to go except back to our parents' house, which was presented as an absolute last resort. "They're driving me crazy there," she explained between sobs. "Always asking about my plans and my future. At least you understand me better." The irony was staggering. I understood her all too well, including her skill at manipulating situations to her advantage. Still, I found myself reluctantly extending the arrangement, now with the condition that she contribute to utilities and groceries. This request was met with shock and accusations. I don't have any income right now. How can you ask me for money when I'm struggling? That's so cruel, Dominic. The pattern was painfully familiar. Any expectation of reciprocity or responsibility was framed as unreasonable cruelty. The difference was that now it was happening under my own roof, in the space I had created as a sanctuary from precisely this dynamic. By early February, my patience had reached its breaking point. Amy had established an increasingly permanent presence in my home, rearranging furniture without permission, claiming spaces as hers, and treating my house rules as optional suggestions rather than requirements. The promised job search had yielded exactly one interview, which she declined to attend because the company culture didn't seem like a good fit based on their website. I called a meeting with my parents, hoping their influence might succeed where mine had failed. We gathered at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, to discuss the situation. Amy needs to move back home, I stated plainly after we'd exchanged brief pleasantries. The arrangement at my house isn't working. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret before my father spoke. Actually, son, we've been wanting to talk with you about something along those lines. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. We've been thinking about Amy's situation, and we have a proposal that might solve everything. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something in their tone triggered every warning system in my body. We've noticed how hard Amy is trying to get established, my father continued. What she really needs is stability, a foundation from which to build her future. My mother nodded encouragingly. You, on the other hand, are already established. You've proven you can succeed under any circumstances. A cold certainty settled in my stomach as I began to see where this conversation was heading. We think it would make sense for Amy to take over your house, my father said, as casually as if suggesting a restaurant for dinner. She needs the stability it would provide, and you could move back home with us. Take over my house? I repeated, certain I'd misunderstood. You mean rent it from me while I'm traveling for work or something? No, honey, my mother clarified, her voice gentle as if speaking to a child. We mean transfer ownership to her. You would come back home, where we'd only charge you discounted rent much less than your current mortgage. The proposal was so outrageous that for a moment I could only stare at them in stunned silence. They were suggesting I give away my house, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice, to my chronically unemployed sister who couldn't even maintain basic household cleanliness during a temporary stay. I struggled to find words that wouldn't end our relationship permanently. That's not going to happen. Ever. Don't be hasty, Dominic, my father said, his tone hardening. Think about it logically. You're single, focused on your career. You don't really need all that space. Amy could use it to finally get her life on track. And you'd be helping family, my mother added, as if this explained and justified everything. Isn't that what matters most? The conversation continued, growing increasingly surreal as they outlined their rationale. Since I had succeeded because of paying rent early, I should welcome the chance to help my sister while saving money. My proven resilience meant I could handle another period of building up, while Amy's sensitive nature required the security of homeownership to flourish. They had clearly rehearsed these arguments, presenting them as logical conclusions rather than the grossly unfair redistribution of resources they represented. As their explanations continued, something broke inside me, not my resolve, but the last thread of illusion about our family dynamic. This wasn't just unfair treatment or different expectations. This was the systematic exploitation of one child to benefit another, and it had been happening my entire life. No, I said finally, interrupting my father's detailed explanation of how this arrangement would benefit everyone. My voice was steadier than I expected. Not only will I not be giving Amy my house, but she needs to be out within 7 days. If she's not, I'll begin formal eviction proceedings. My mother gasped. You wouldn't really evict your own sister. 7 days, I repeated, standing up from the table. And I'd suggest you stop treating me like a resource to be allocated rather than a son to be respected. I walked out of the coffee shop with my heart pounding and hands shaking, but with a clarity I had never experienced before. The magnitude of what my parents had proposed, and what it revealed about how they fundamentally viewed me, was staggering. This wasn't just about a house. It was about my place in this family, and whether I would continue allowing myself to be used. For the first time in my life, the answer was a definitive, unapologetic no. The week following the coffee shop confrontation passed in a blur of tense exchanges and emotional manipulation. My parents called repeatedly, alternating between guilt trips, after everything we've done for you, appeals to family loyalty, blood is thicker than water, and thinly veiled threats about my place in the family. You're choosing property over relationships. Amy employed a different strategy, cycling through tearful pleas, angry accusations, and periodic attempts at reconciliation that inevitably circled back to why she should be allowed to stay or, better yet, own my house. The constant emotional whiplash was exhausting, but my resolve remained firm. She needed to be out by the deadline. On day 5, as Amy showed no signs of packing or making alternative arrangements, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister who lived in Philadelphia. "Dominic, what's this I hear about you throwing poor Amy out on the street?" she began without preamble. "Your mother is beside herself." The characterization was so wildly inaccurate that I almost laughed. "I'm not throwing anyone on the street, Aunt Susan. I'm asking Amy to return to our parents' house after she's overstayed a temporary arrangement by several weeks." "Well, that's not how your mother explained it. She said Amy was finally getting settled and you're forcing her out because of some petty disagreement." It became clear that my parents were activating the extended family network against me, presenting a carefully edited version of events that cast me as the villain. Over the next 2 days, I received similar calls from 2 more aunts, an uncle, and even my elderly grandmother, all expressing disappointment in my selfishness and urging me to do the right thing for family. The pressure was intense, but served only to strengthen my conviction. If my parents were willing to distort the situation so dramatically to extended family, what other manipulation had I accepted as normal throughout my life? On the morning of the 7th day, Amy's deadline to leave, I returned home from an early gym session to find my neighbor Warren waiting by my front door. Warren was a retired postal worker in his 70s, who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. We'd developed a friendly relationship over the 2 years I'd owned my house, occasionally sharing tools or keeping an eye on each other's properties during trips. "Morning, Dominic," he called as I approached. "Got a minute to chat?" I invited him in for coffee, curious about his unusual early morning visit. As we settled at my kitchen table, Warren seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Not sure how to say this," he began, turning his mug slowly between weathered hands. "But I thought you should know something that struck me as odd." He explained that 3 days earlier, while tending to his front garden, he'd noticed Amy leading our parents and another woman through my house. "They were talking about paint colors and furniture placement," Warren said. "The woman had one of those big design portfolios. I assumed you knew about it, but then yesterday I overheard your sister telling the mail carrier she'd be moving in permanently soon. Thought maybe you should be aware, in case this isn't something you arranged." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been at work, Amy had given our parents access to my house and brought in what sounded like an interior decorator. They had been planning this takeover for who knows how long, certainly, well before the proposal at the coffee shop. I thanked Warren for the information and, after he left, began a systematic search of my house. In the spare room where Amy was staying, I found a folder hidden beneath the mattress containing printouts of local real estate listings, documents about property transfer between family members, and, most disturbingly, a draft letter addressed to my neighbors introducing Amy as the new owner of her brother's former house. The letter was dated 2 months earlier, weeks before Amy had supposedly lost her job and needed temporary housing. The entire crisis had been manufactured as a pretext to get her foot in the door, literally. Further searching revealed Amy had already begun subtly claiming the space. Mail delivered to my address with her name, small personal items distributed throughout common areas, and notes in her handwriting about planned changes to her kitchen and master bathroom. I was still processing this discovery when my phone rang a call from Taylor, who'd been out of town for work. "Hey man, just got back and checked my mail. There's a weird card here I think you should know about." He described an invitation to a new home celebration for Amy, listing my address and a date 3 weeks in the future. The invite explained that Amy was excited to welcome friends to her new place, generously provided by her brother, who's moving back with their parents. Fury doesn't adequately describe what I felt in that moment. This wasn't just presumptuous planning or wishful thinking. It was a coordinated campaign to create social pressure and established facts that would make it nearly impossible for me to refuse without appearing cruel and unreasonable. I was preparing to confront Amy when my doorbell rang. Outside stood Amy alongside our parents, all wearing expressions of determined resolve. "We need to talk," my father said as they entered without waiting for invitation. "This situation has gone on long enough." My mother immediately began a practice speech about family obligations and Amy's needs. Amy stood slightly behind them, alternating between looking smugly confident and performatively distressed as the conversation required. I let them continue for several minutes, laying out their case for why I should surrender my home and future for Amy's benefit. When they finally paused for my response, I silently retrieved the folder of documents I'd found, along with my phone displaying the text from Taylor about the housewarming invitation. "Would anyone like to explain these?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Particularly the planning that began months before Amy's supposed employment crisis. The stunned silence was broken by Amy's indignant response. "You went through my private things? That's a violation of privacy? In my house," I emphasized. "Which you were planning to claim while I was at work one day, apparently." My father attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Now, Dominic, I'm sure this looks suspicious, but we were just being proactive. Amy needs a fresh start, and your house makes more sense for her needs than for you. You're always working anyway. So my years of work mean I don't deserve to enjoy the results? While Amy's chronic unemployment means she deserves to benefit from my sacrifice? We're just trying to help everyone," my mother interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "You've always been so capable, and Amy struggles more. This would solve so many problems at once." The absurdity of their logic that my competence should be punished while Amy's irresponsibility was rewarded crystallized. Years of unequal treatment into one perfect, clarifying moment of understanding. This wasn't a one-time request or an unusual circumstance. This was the culmination of a lifetime pattern, now escalated to its logical extreme. "Amy needs to be out of my house today," I said with finality. "Not in 7 days. Today. And all three of you need to understand something clearly. My home, my career, my finances, none of it is available to solve Amy's problems anymore." "You can't be serious," my father sputtered. "Where is she supposed to go?" "The same place she's lived, rent-free, for most of her 30 years, your house. Or she can use her apparently extensive knowledge of local real estate listings to find her own place." "We're your family," my mother said, tears forming. "How can you be so cold?" "Family goes both ways," I responded. "It means respect, not exploitation. It means celebrating success, not punishing it. It means helping each other grow, not enabling stagnation. What you're doing isn't family. It's parasitic." The word hung in the air between us, harsh but undeniably accurate. Amy finally spoke, dropping all pretense of vulnerability for raw anger. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Mr. Responsible with his house and his career. You have no idea what it's like to struggle with anxiety and uncertainty like I do." "You're right, I don't," I acknowledged. "Because I was never allowed to. At 14, I was working while you were at the mall. At 21, I was paying rent while you lived free. Now, at 30, I'm supposed to give you my house, because you've never developed the skills our parents made sure. I learned through necessity." I turned to my parents. "The greatest disservice you've done isn't to me, it's to Amy. You've created a 30-year-old child who believes she's entitled to other people's achievements." The conversation deteriorated further, with accusations, tears, and finally threats. My father suggested that if I proceeded with forcing Amy out, I should consider myself no longer welcome in this family. My mother begged for compromise, while simultaneously reinforcing every manipulative pattern that had led to this conflict. I remained unmoved. By evening, after hours of emotional warfare, Amy packed a single suitcase of essentials and left with our parents, promising ominously that this isn't over. The rest of her belongings would require another trip, which I stipulated must happen with advance notice and my presence. That night, alone in my house that had so nearly been taken from me, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: relief, grief, anger, and beneath it all, a profound sense of liberation. For the first time, I had not just recognized the toxic pattern, but actively refused to participate in it further. I called Taylor, who came over immediately with takeout food and supportive outrage at what he termed the most insane family heist plan he'd ever heard. "What now?" he asked, as we sat on my back deck, the February night unusually mild. "They're not going to just accept this and move on." "I know," I replied. "This is just the beginning." I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how much worse the situation would get before it finally improved. The battle lines had been drawn, but the war for my independence, and ultimately, for a healthier family dynamic, was just beginning. True to my prediction, my family's campaign escalated rather than subsided in the weeks following the confrontation. Their approach shifted from direct demands to more insidious tactics, clearly designed to wear down my resistance and force compliance through exhaustion and social pressure. First came the public relations offensive. My mother initiated contact with virtually every member of our extended family, sharing a carefully crafted narrative that portrayed me as suddenly, inexplicably cruel to my struggling sister. According to the version that eventually made its way back to me, I had invited Amy to stay during her time of need, encouraged her to make plans for a long-term arrangement, then abruptly evicted her without cause, refusing any compromise that might help my mentally fragile sister. The resulting deluge of concerned calls, messages, and even unexpected visits from relatives tested my patience and resolve. Some approached with genuine concern, having known me all my life and finding the characterization suspicious. Others arrived with righteous indignation, already convinced of my villainy. To each, I provided the same response: a calm, factual account of what had actually transpired, without emotional embellishment or counterattacks against my family. Some believed me, others didn't. I discovered that the truth mattered less to certain relatives than maintaining the comfortable family mythology that had been constructed over decades. Simultaneously, I began receiving formal mail that required attention: a credit card application in my name sent to my parents' address, inquiries about accounts I hadn't opened, notices about subscription services I'd never requested. A check of my credit report confirmed my suspicion someone had attempted to open several financial accounts using my personal information. While I couldn't prove who was responsible, the timing was suspicious at minimum. I responded by freezing my credit, changing all my passwords, and implementing two-factor authentication on every account possible. I also consulted with a lawyer, Taylor's brother Jason, who specialized in family law, about my options for protecting myself. "Document everything," Jason advised during our initial consultation. "Every communication, every attempt at contact, every financial irregularity. Pennsylvania doesn't make it easy to get restraining orders against family members without evidence of physical threats, but establishing a clear pattern of harassment can help if things escalate further." His words proved prescient when, 3 weeks after Amy's departure, I received an urgent call from my mother while in a work meeting. "Dominic, you need to come to the hospital right away," she said, her voice wavering with what sounded like genuine distress. "Amy's had an accident. It's serious." My heart raced as I asked for details, my anger temporarily suspended by concern. My mother remained vague but insistent. Amy was in the emergency room, asking for me, and I needed to come immediately. I rescheduled my afternoon appointments and drove directly to UPMC Presbyterian Hospital, where my mother had indicated Amy had been taken. At the emergency department reception, however, they had no record of Amy being admitted that day or even that week. Confused and increasingly suspicious, I called my mother back, only to have the call go straight to voicemail. My father's phone similarly went unanswered. Finally, I tried Amy's number, which rang several times before being answered by a male voice I didn't recognize. "Hello? Who's calling for Amy?" "This is her brother, Dominic." "Who's this?" "Oh, Dr. Mercer. Your sister's fine, she's at her regular therapy appointment. Did you need to speak with her?" The realization hit me with dizzying force. There was no emergency, no accident, no hospital stay. The entire scenario had been fabricated to manipulate me into rushing to Amy's side, likely to create an opportunity for further emotional pressure about her living situation. I thanked the confused therapist, ended the call, and sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, trembling with a volatile mixture of relief, rage, and something approaching clarity. This deception crossed a line beyond anything I'd expected, using fear and family emergency as tools of manipulation. What kind of people would deliberately create such panic in a family member? The answer was painful but unavoidable. The kind of people who viewed me as a resource rather than a person with valid boundaries and needs of my own. That evening I took 3 significant actions that would alter the course of our family dynamic permanently. First, I called Taylor's brother Jason again and retained him officially as my attorney. Second, I changed the locks on my house and installed a basic security system with cameras. Third, I composed a clear, unemotional email to my parents and Amy, outlining exactly what had happened that day and informing them that all future communication would need to go through Jason. The manufactured medical emergency today demonstrated that we cannot currently have a healthy direct relationship, I wrote. I remain open to rebuilding our connection in the future, but only with professional support and genuine acknowledgement of the patterns that have led us here. The response was predictable, but still painful. My father called Jason's office to declare that I was dead to him if I insisted on bringing lawyers into family business. My mother left tearful voicemails about how I was breaking her heart by turning a simple misunderstanding into legal threats. Amy posted vague but pointed social media messages about toxic family members and the pain of betrayal. Externally, I maintained my normal routine: work, home maintenance, occasional social gatherings with friends. Internally, I processed waves of grief, doubt, and anger. Had I overreacted? Was I the unreasonable one? These questions surfaced regularly, especially during quiet moments when the weight of family estrangement felt heaviest. Taylor proved invaluable during this period, offering both practical support and emotional perspective when my own became clouded by years of conditioning. "They're counting on your doubt," he reminded me during one particularly difficult evening. "The fact that you're questioning yourself while they're doubling down on manipulation tells you everything about who's being reasonable here." I also began regular sessions with Dr. Kirsten Chen, a therapist specializing in family trauma and boundary setting. Her insights helped me recognize patterns I'd normalized throughout my life and develop healthier responses to the ongoing pressure tactics. "What you're experiencing is an extinction burst," she explained during one session. "When long-established patterns of control suddenly stop working, there's often an escalation before acceptance. They're trying everything that used to work, plus new tactics, because they can't believe the old dynamic is really changing." Armed with this understanding, I held firm despite increasing attempts to break through my boundaries. There were unexpected appearances at my workplace, messages delivered through mutual friends, and even a bizarre incident where my parents and Amy arrived at my house with a rental truck, apparently operating under the assumption they could simply move her in while I was at work. The security cameras and changed locks prevented this plan from proceeding, but the audacity was breathtaking. Throughout this challenging period, I maintained 2 principles. I would not engage directly with their manipulation tactics, and I would not close the door permanently on eventual reconciliation, provided it occurred with appropriate professional support and genuine acknowledgement of the problematic patterns. 2 months into this impasse, Jason called with surprising news. He had received a request for a meeting from an attorney representing my parents and Amy. "This could go either way," Jason cautioned. "Sometimes hiring counsel means they're ready to approach things more rationally. Other times, it's just escalation in a different form. I'd suggest meeting, but maintaining clear boundaries about what's negotiable and what isn't." The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a conference room at Jason's firm. I arrived prepared for further manipulation, but what I encountered instead was unexpected. My parents looked diminished somehow, the confident authority they'd always projected notably absent. Amy sat between them, unusually subdued. Their attorney, a woman in her 50s named Margaret Bloom, spoke with a directness that contrasted sharply with my family's usual emotional tactics. My clients have asked me to facilitate a discussion about moving forward, she began. They recognize that recent interactions have damaged family relationships and would like to explore a path toward resolution. What followed was surprising. A series of direct questions about my perspective and boundaries, asked without the usual interruptions, dismissals, or emotional manipulations that had characterized family discussions throughout my life. When my turn came to respond, I outlined my position clearly. I would consider rebuilding relationships, but only with professional family therapy, explicit acknowledgement of the patterns that had led to this break, and firm boundaries around my property and finances. These terms are non-negotiable, I concluded. My home remains mine alone. My finances remain separate from family needs. Any future relationship must be based on mutual respect rather than resource extraction. My father started to object, but Margaret silenced him with a raised hand, a gesture I'd never seen anyone successfully use with him before. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, Amy," she said, turning to my family, "this is the point where you need to decide what matters more, maintaining the dynamic you're accustomed to, or having your son and brother in your lives moving forward." The silence that followed felt weightier than any conversation we'd had before. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice softer than usual. "We didn't realize how all this looked from your perspective, Dominic. We never meant to use you. We thought we were just helping Amy in the ways she needed." It wasn't a full acknowledgement, but it was more self-reflection than I'd ever heard from her. "By treating us differently from birth," I responded carefully, "you created entirely different adults. I became self-sufficient because I had to be. Amy remained dependent because she was allowed to be. Neither outcome was inevitable, they were created by your choices." Amy looked up then, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in our adult lives. "I thought you had it easier," she said quietly. "Everyone always praised you, talked about how successful you were. I felt like the family disappointment." "I never saw the praise," I admitted. "I only saw the expectations and responsibilities I had that you didn't. The rent I paid while you lived free. The jobs I worked while you explored hobbies. The loans I was denied while you received gift after gift." My father cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "We thought we were responding to your different personalities. You seemed so capable, Dominic. Amy needed more guidance. What she needed was the same accountability you gave me," I countered. "By protecting her from consequences, you prevented her from developing the skills she now lacks at 30. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, more honest than any we'd ever had before. There were difficult moments, defensive reactions, and old patterns threatening to re-emerge. But unlike previous confrontations, this one was moderated by neutral professionals who prevented the conversation from derailing into manipulation or emotional warfare. By the end, we had reached what Jason later called a functional ceasefire, if not yet peace. My family agreed to my core conditions: family therapy, respect for my financial and property boundaries, and a cooling-off period before attempting to resume regular contact. As we prepared to leave, Amy approached me separately. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began hesitantly. "About Mom and Dad preventing me from developing skills by protecting me from consequences." I nodded, uncertain where she was going with this. "I think you're right," she continued. "I've never had to figure anything out for myself. When you refused to give me your house, it was the first time anyone in the family had ever really told me no, and meant it. It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of entitlement wouldn't disappear in a single conversation. But it was the first acknowledgement I'd ever heard from Amy that perhaps the family dynamic hadn't served her well either. As I drove home that evening, I felt a cautious optimism taking root alongside the hurt and wariness that had dominated recent months. The road ahead would be long, and undoubtedly difficult. Old patterns wouldn't disappear overnight, and trust would take significant time to rebuild, if it ever fully could. But for the first time, it seemed possible that from this painful rupture, something healthier might eventually grow, not just for me, but for all of us. 1 year passed before I would call what existed between myself and my family a relationship again. A year of careful rebuilding, professional guidance, and fundamental shifts in our dynamic. The path was neither straight nor easy, marked by setbacks, resistance to change, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly at times, progress emerged from the wreckage of our old patterns. The weekly family therapy sessions with Dr. Gabriela Ramirez proved crucial to this transformation. Unlike previous family discussions where emotional manipulation and established roles predetermined the outcome, these structured conversations created space for previously unspoken truths. What I'm observing, Dr. Ramirez noted during our third session, is a family system that developed highly specialized roles. Dominic as the provider and problem solver, Amy as the perpetual dependent, and parents as the allocators of resources and responsibilities. These roles became so rigid that when Dominic attempted to step outside his assigned function, the entire system mobilized to force him back into place. My father initially bristled at this characterization. We were just parenting according to each child's needs. Dominic was naturally independent. Amy needed more support. Or, Dr. Ramirez suggested gently, Dominic became independent because independence was demanded of him, while Amy remained dependent because dependence was permitted and even encouraged. These insights didn't transform decades of entrenched behavior overnight, but they provided language for what I'd experienced and a framework for understanding how we'd arrived at such dysfunction. More importantly, they helped my parents begin to recognize their role in creating the very dynamics they'd previously attributed to mine and Amy's inherent personalities. Outside the therapist's office, change manifested in smaller, but equally significant ways. Amy, facing genuine adult consequences without the usual parental bailout for perhaps the first time, struggled initially. She moved back into our parents' home, but under new conditions: a modest rent requirement, responsibility for her own expenses, and a timeline for developing independence. The first months were rocky. She cycled through brief periods of compliance, followed by attempts to revert to old patterns. Emotional outbursts, when expectations weren't lowered, claims of anxiety too severe to permit employment, and efforts to extract resources through guilt and manipulation. The difference now was that my parents, with professional guidance and a growing awareness of their enabling patterns, maintained the boundaries they'd established. When Amy quit another job without securing replacement income, they expressed sympathy but didn't cover her expenses. When she complained about the unfairness of paying rent, they calmly reminded her that housing costs were a universal adult responsibility. 6 months into this new arrangement, I received an unexpected text from Amy. "Can we meet for coffee? Just us." We met at a neutral location, a cafe equidistant between our homes. The Amy who arrived was noticeably different from the entitled sister I'd grown up with. Her clothing was simpler, her demeanor less dramatic. Most strikingly, she looked me in the eye when speaking, without the performative emotions that had characterized our previous interactions. "I've been interviewing for administrative assistant positions," she said after we'd exchanged somewhat awkward greetings. "I thought maybe, well, you've always been good at interviews. I wondered if you might give me some advice." It was the first time in our adult lives that Amy had approached me as a source of guidance rather than resources. The request was modest, appropriate, and acknowledged my expertise without entitlement to it. I agreed, and over the next hour, we conducted a mock interview followed by constructive feedback. As we prepared to leave, Amy said something that suggested a level of self-reflection I hadn't believed her capable of. "I've been thinking a lot about why I expected you to give me your house," she admitted. "It sounds crazy now, but at the time, it seemed completely reasonable to me. I genuinely couldn't understand why you were being so selfish." "And now?" I prompted. "Now I'm embarrassed and confused about how I could have thought that way." She twisted her coffee cup in her hands. "Dr. Morrow, my new therapist says I developed something called learned helplessness from never having to solve my own problems. Apparently, it warped my sense of what's normal." This conversation marked a turning point in our sibling relationship. It wasn't an instant transformation to close friendship. Too much history lay between us for that, but it represented the first steps toward a more balanced, adult relationship, based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. My parents' evolution proved more complex. Decades of parenting patterns couldn't be unlearned quickly, and they oscillated between genuine efforts to change and reflexive returns to familiar dynamics. My father struggled particularly with relinquishing the patriarchal authority to distribute family resources and responsibilities according to his judgment. "I was only trying to do what was best for both of you," he insisted during one particularly difficult therapy session. "Parents are supposed to treat children differently based on their needs. Different support is reasonable," Dr. Ramirez acknowledged. But what Dominic experienced wasn't different support, it was different valuation. He received responsibilities without privileges, while Amy received privileges without responsibilities. These conversations were painful but necessary, exposing the unconscious biases and patterns that had shaped our family for generations. Gradually, my father began to recognize how his own upbringing, as the responsible one in his family, had influenced his parenting approach, perpetuating a cycle he hadn't consciously chosen. My mother's turning point came after discovering the folder of documents outlining the plan to take my house evidence she'd previously denied knowing about. Finding it while helping Amy organize her belongings forced her to confront the magnitude of what had been attempted. "I told myself we were just helping Amy get established," she admitted during a private conversation that followed. "But seeing it all laid out like that, we weren't helping anyone. We were stealing from one child to artificially support another. How did I not see that?" This acknowledgement, painful as it was, opened the door to genuine repair. Not instant forgiveness that would take time and consistent changed behavior, but the possibility of building something healthier moving forward. 9 months after our initial legal meeting, Amy secured a stable administrative position with a local company. The job wasn't glamorous, but it provided consistent income, benefits, and structure. With her first 3 paychecks, she opened a savings account specifically designated for future housing costs. "It's not much yet," she told me during one of our now regular monthly lunches, "but I'm adding to it every month. Eventually, I want to rent my own place. Something small, but mine." The pride in her voice, as she described this modest goal, reflected a fundamental shift in her self-concept from perpetual dependent to emerging adult capable of supporting herself. The journey hadn't been easy for her, involving confrontation with lifelong patterns and the painful recognition of how those patterns had limited her development. My parents, too, showed evidence of genuine change. They began treating my successes as achievements to be celebrated rather than resources to be redistributed. They respected the boundaries I maintained around my finances and property. Most significantly, they started viewing Amy's growing independence as progress rather than failure of care. By the 1-year anniversary of our confrontation, we had established what Dr. Ramirez described as a functional family system, not perfect, not without occasional regressions into old patterns, but fundamentally healthier than what had existed before. To mark this milestone, my parents suggested a family dinner at their home. Unlike previous gatherings characterized by tension and hidden agendas, this one held a new quality: authenticity. We discussed real accomplishments and genuine challenges. Amy shared news about a potential promotion without dramatic embellishment. My father asked about my work with genuine interest, rather than assessment of resources. My mother expressed pride in both her children's distinct paths, without comparison or hierarchy. After dinner, my father asked to speak with me privately on the back porch, where we'd had countless conversations throughout my childhood. The early spring evening carried the promise of warming days ahead, a fitting backdrop for what followed. "I need to say something I should have said a long time ago," he began, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility. "I was wrong about many things, Dominic. The way we treated you and Amy differently. The expectations we placed on you without corresponding support. The way we tried to take what you had built through your own efforts." He paused, looking out at the yard rather than at me. I told myself it was good parenting responding to each child's nature. But the truth is, I was repeating patterns from my own childhood without questioning them. It was easier to see you as naturally responsible than to acknowledge we created that through our treatment of you. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I want you to know that I see it now. Not perfectly, not completely, I'm still learning. But I see how our choices shaped both you and Amy, in ways that helped and harmed each of you differently. He turned to face me directly. I'm proud of the man you've become, son. Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you are, including the strength it took to break patterns I lacked the courage to question. This conversation didn't erase years of unequal treatment or instantly heal deep wounds, but it represented something I'd never truly experienced from my father before: accountability without qualification, recognition without expectation. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from the brink of permanent estrangement to the beginnings of a healthier family system. The transformation hadn't come easily or without cost. It required painful confrontation, professional intervention, and the willingness of each family member to examine destructive patterns and commit to change. What emerged wasn't perfect harmony or complete resolution. We still occasionally slipped into old dynamics, especially during stress or conflict. The damage of decades couldn't be undone in a single year. But we had interrupted a generational pattern that would have continued without intervention, establishing a new foundation based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. For me personally, the most profound lesson wasn't about family dynamics, but about the necessity of boundaries. Standing firm against the pressure to sacrifice my own well-being for others' comfort hadn't been selfish. It had been necessary not only for my health, but ultimately for my family's as well. By refusing to participate in a dysfunctional system, I had created the possibility for something better to take its place. Amy, too, had learned crucial lessons through this painful process. "I always thought you had it easier," she admitted during a recent conversation. "Everyone praised your independence while criticizing my struggles. I never saw how that independence came with burdens I was protected from, or how that protection became its own kind of prison." As for my parents, their journey involved the difficult recognition that their intentions, however well-meaning, had created harm alongside support. This acknowledgement allowed them to begin the process of repairing relationships based on who their adult children actually were, rather than the roles assigned to us from childhood. The house that had become the symbol of our family's dysfunction remained mine, no longer a source of conflict, but a reminder of both how far we'd come and how necessary the confrontation had been. Within those walls, I had learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. True family support means fostering independence in all members, not creating dependency in some while exploiting the capability of others. The path forward would contain both progress and setbacks, moments of connection and painful reminders of past wounds. Family healing is rarely linear or complete, but in breaking the cycle of unequal expectations and responsibilities, we had created the possibility for genuinely supportive relationships based on mutual respect rather than predetermined roles. And that, I discovered, was worth every difficult conversation, every painful confrontation, and every moment of standing firm in my own worth, not just for me, but for all of us. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who treated you unfairly? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and clarity in navigating your own family relationships, whatever form they may take.